Hi, let me ask you something. What if you are already attracting more than you realize? There are moments when life becomes quiet. The day is finally over. The noise has stopped. And for a few minutes, there is nothing left to distract you from your own thoughts. That is often when the questions appear. Why am I still struggling with this? Why does the same kind of situation keep happening? Why do some people seem to move forward so easily while I keep finding myself back at the same place? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, what if something inside me is contributing to the pattern? Don't worry. This isn't a story about blaming yourself for everything that has happened in your life. Life is much more complicated than that. But tonight, we're going to explore an idea that asks you to look somewhere most of us rarely look, not at the world around us, but at the world inside us. So wherever you are right now, settle in. Forget about trying to agree with everything you hear. You don't have to. Just listen, question, and perhaps think about one area of your life that you desperately want to change. Welcome to Actionable Listener, where we don't simply listen to ideas. We slow down long enough to ask what those ideas could actually mean for our lives. And tonight's book begins with a fascinating possibility. What if the life you keep experiencing is connected to the person you keep practicing being? This is The Law of Attraction by Mitesh Khatri and Indu Khatri. And before we talk about attracting wealth, success, love, or happiness, it's worth understanding why Mitesh Khatri wrote this book in the first place. Because according to his own story, the idea didn't come to him from a life that had always been easy. Mitesh describes growing up in a middle-class family with financial struggles. He says he was academically weak and eventually chose to drop out of junior college because he didn't believe he was good at studies. There was no family business waiting for him, no extraordinary business advantage, no obvious reason to assume that he would one day become a successful corporate trainer and best-selling author. He also describes himself as having low confidence for many years, and says that he struggled with relationships and experienced failure. In other words, he didn't begin with the identity of someone who had everything figured out. He says that learning and practicing the law of attraction became a turning point in his life. He credits it with helping him transform his circumstances, and eventually began teaching the ideas himself. But then came another realization. He could teach these principles in workshops, but a workshop could only reach the people who attended it. So he and Indu Khatri wrote The Law of Attraction as a simple, practical book that could reach people who might never attend one of those workshops. The authors describe its purpose as explaining how the law of attraction works, exploring what they consider its scientific basis, sharing examples, and providing techniques that readers can practice. And that tells us something important about how this book is meant to be approached. It isn't supposed to be something you read, feel inspired by, and then forget. The authors want you to practice it, to observe yourself, to change your patterns, to consciously create more of what you want and less of what you don't. But what exactly does that mean? Imagine that two people wake up tomorrow morning facing exactly the same problem. Neither one has more money. Neither one has more time. Neither one has an easier situation. But one looks at the problem and thinks, this always happens to me. The other thinks, all right, what can I do about it? That tiny difference may seem insignificant, but repeat it for a year, and then 5 years, and eventually those two people can end up living completely different lives. Why? Because thoughts don't always remain thoughts. They influence feelings. Feelings influence decisions. Decisions become actions. Actions create consequences. And consequences become experiences. This is where the authors introduce one of the central ideas of the book, feelings. thoughts, beliefs, actions. FTBA. Think about something you want very badly. Maybe it's a better career. Maybe it's financial freedom. Maybe it's a healthier body. Maybe it's confidence. Maybe it's a peaceful relationship. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. Do your daily actions actually match that desire? You might say, I want to become fit. But what happens when it's time to exercise? I'll start tomorrow. You might say, I want to become financially secure. But when money comes in, you spend without a plan. You might say, I want a loving relationship. But when someone gets close, you become suspicious, defensive, or afraid. You might say, I want to become successful. But every time you have to risk failure, you retreat. So what is really happening? Your conscious mind wants one thing, while your deeper patterns are pulling in another direction. And this is where FTBA becomes interesting. Your thoughts influence your feelings. Repeated feelings can strengthen certain beliefs. Beliefs influence your actions, and your actions create results. Then those results appear to confirm the belief you started with. Imagine someone who believes, I am not good enough. They apply for an opportunity. Before they even begin, they expect rejection. That creates anxiety. The anxiety makes them perform poorly. They don't get selected. And now they say, see, I knew I wasn't good enough. The result has just strengthened the belief. So the next opportunity produces even more fear, and the cycle continues. But what if the cycle were interrupted? What if the person changed the thought from, I am not good enough, to, I may not be ready yet, but I can become ready? The feeling changes slightly. The action changes. They prepare more. They practice. They try again. Maybe they still fail. But now failure doesn't prove they're incapable. It tells them what they need to improve. One small change, and the entire cycle begins moving in another direction. Now think about your own life. Where do you seem to repeat the same pattern? Is there something you keep promising yourself you'll change, but somehow never do? Is there a type of person you keep attracting into your life? A fear you keep returning to? A financial habit you keep repeating? A goal you keep postponing? What if you stopped asking, why does this always happen to me? And instead asked, what pattern inside me keeps participating in this? That is a very different question, and sometimes a much more powerful one, because before you can change a pattern, you have to notice it, and that takes us deeper into beliefs. The beliefs you don't realize you have. Most of us like to think we choose our beliefs, but many of them were formed long before we were old enough to question them. A child hears, money is difficult. People can't be trusted. You're not good at this. Don't take risks. Successful people are lucky. That's just how our family is. And eventually, those sentences become invisible. They stop sounding like opinions. They start sounding like reality. Imagine a person who grew up believing that money always disappears. Even when they earn more, they may still behave as though there will never be enough. Imagine someone who learned that love always ends in pain. Even when they meet a good person, they may constantly look for signs that the relationship will fail. Imagine someone who was repeatedly told they weren't intelligent. They may avoid difficult things, not because they can't learn, but because they don't want to discover that their old belief might be wrong. This is why changing your life can begin with a deceptively simple question. What do I believe about myself? And then another question. Who taught me that? Because perhaps some of the limits you live with today were never actually your limits. They were conclusions someone else made about you and you accepted them. Like attracts like. The phrase at the heart of the law of attraction is simple, like attracts like. The authors describe this through the idea of energy and frequency. According to their framework, everything is energy vibrating at different frequencies, and matching frequencies attract one another. They connect this idea to physics, the Bhagavad Gita, and the concept of karma. That is the author's interpretation. But even if you put the metaphysical part aside for a moment, there is a very practical phenomenon worth noticing. Your mind pays attention to what it expects. Think about buying a new phone. Before buying it, you probably saw that model occasionally. After buying it, suddenly it seemed like everyone had one. The world didn't suddenly change. Your attention did. And the same thing can happen with opportunities. If you believe nobody appreciates you, you notice every criticism. If you believe you're unlucky, you notice every setback. If you believe opportunities exist, you start looking for them. The circumstances may be similar, but the person experiencing them is different. So what are you training your mind to notice? Problems? Threats? Rejection? Or possibilities? The cycle that creates your reality. Think about a person who believes, nobody respects me. They walk into a conversation expecting disrespect. Because they expect it, they become defensive. The other person notices the defensiveness. They respond differently. The conversation becomes uncomfortable, and afterward, the person thinks, exactly, nobody respects me. The belief created behavior. The behavior influenced the interaction. The interaction became evidence, and the evidence strengthened the belief. That's the cycle. And once you understand it, you begin seeing these cycles everywhere. A person who believes they're bad at something avoids practicing. Because they don't practice, they don't improve. Because they don't improve, they say, see, I'm bad at it. Another cycle. Someone who believes they are destined to fail avoids taking risks. Because they avoid risks, they miss opportunities. Because they miss opportunities, they conclude they were right. Another cycle. But cycles can be interrupted, and that's where conscious change begins. Visualization. The authors also emphasize visualization. The idea is simple. Before you experience something externally, create a clear picture of it internally. Close your eyes. Imagine the goal. See it, feel it, experience it. But there's a more useful question hidden inside visualization. Don't only imagine the reward. Imagine the person who earned it. If you want to become confident, don't only visualize people applauding you. Visualize yourself speaking while nervous, answering difficult questions, making mistakes, and continuing anyway. If you want financial freedom, don't only visualize a large bank balance. Visualize yourself learning about money, making disciplined decisions, saying no to unnecessary spending, building valuable skills, taking intelligent risks. If you want a healthier body, don't only visualize the final result. Visualize yourself choosing the healthier meal, going for the walk, working out when motivation isn't there. Because the goal isn't merely to dream about the destination. It's to become familiar with the journey. Ask yourself, what would the version of me who has already achieved this goal do today? Not someday. Today. Affirmations. This is also where affirmations come in. You repeat a statement that represents the belief you want to strengthen. But there's a danger here. If you tell yourself, I am incredibly successful, while every part of you is screaming, no, I'm not, the words may feel meaningless. A more believable affirmation could be, I am becoming someone who follows through. Now, prove it. Complete one task you've been avoiding. Keep one promise you made to yourself. Do one thing you said you would do, because every action becomes evidence, and evidence is powerful. You don't only tell yourself who you are, you demonstrate it again and again and again. Eventually, the identity begins to change. Gratitude, then there is gratitude. It's easy to understand why this appears in a book about attraction. When the mind constantly focuses on what is missing, it can become blind to what already exists. You get a new phone, and soon you want a better one. You get a new house, and soon you're comparing it with someone else's. You achieve something and immediately move the finish line. There's nothing wrong with ambition, but if your mind is permanently trained to ask, "What next?" you can spend your entire life arriving nowhere. Gratitude doesn't mean giving up your ambitions. It means noticing the life you are already living while building the one you want next. Tonight, think of 3 things you usually take for granted. Don't choose impressive things. Choose ordinary ones. A person, a meal, a safe place to sleep, a conversation, a morning, a child's smile, a second chance. What would change if you started noticing those things more often? But what about action? This may be the point where manifestation becomes practical, because wanting something isn't enough. Visualizing isn't enough. Affirmations aren't enough. Even believing isn't enough. At some point, you have to act. You want a better career? Learn something valuable. Apply. Network. Practice. You want better health? Change your habits. Move. Eat differently. Sleep better. You want more money? Increase your skills. Create value. Save. Plan. Invest intelligently. You want better relationships? Communicate. Listen. Set boundaries. Take responsibility. The dream gives you direction, but action moves you. And perhaps that's why the authors include action as part of FTBA, because your actions are where your inner world meets the real world. Why doesn't IT work sometimes? This is where the book becomes especially relevant to anyone who has tried manifestation and felt disappointed. You made the vision board. You repeated the affirmations. You imagined the dream, and nothing happened. So you thought, maybe this law of attraction thing doesn't work. The author's explanation is that people often focus on what they want consciously, while unconsciously carrying beliefs and emotions that contradict it. You say, "I want abundance," but inside, "I'll never have enough." You say, "I want love," but inside, "People always leave." You say, "I want success," but inside, "What if I fail?" The conscious desire points one way. The deeper pattern points another. But there is another important reality. Sometimes things simply don't happen because life is uncertain. Sometimes your strategy doesn't work. Sometimes you need more time. Sometimes you need better skills. Sometimes circumstances outside your control interfere. Not every hardship is something you manifested, and that distinction matters, because the useful lesson of personal responsibility is not, "Everything that happens to me is my fault." It's, "Whatever happens, what can I choose to do next?" That question gives you power without pretending that you control the entire universe. Love, money, and the life around you. The authors extend these ideas into relationships, money, health, and other areas of life. And the same principle keeps returning. Your internal patterns influence your external behavior. If you believe you don't deserve respect, you may tolerate disrespect. If you believe you're bad with money, you may never learn how money works. If you believe you're unhealthy, you may stop believing change is possible. So perhaps the question isn't only, what do I want to attract? Perhaps it is, what am I repeatedly reinforcing? Because every day you reinforce something, a belief, a habit, an identity, a relationship pattern, a way of responding, a way of thinking, and eventually those repetitions become your normal, the real purpose of this book. So what can you actually take from the law of attraction? You don't have to walk away believing that every thought sends a magical signal into the universe. You don't have to believe that every event in your life was attracted by your vibration. And you certainly don't have to blame yourself for circumstances you never controlled. But you can take something extremely valuable from a framework. Become aware of the person you are repeatedly practicing being. Watch your thoughts. Watch your feelings. Question your beliefs. Examine your actions. Look for the cycles. And then change one thing. Because maybe you don't need to transform your entire life this week. Maybe you need one new thought, one healthier response, one boundary, one difficult conversation, 1 hour of learning, one promise kept, one action taken despite fear. And then tomorrow, another. This is how a different identity begins. Quietly, almost invisibly, until one day you look back and realize that the person who once said, "I can't," has become the person who says, "Let me try." The person who once expected rejection begins expecting possibility. The person who once waited for life to change starts changing what they can control. And perhaps that is the most practical interpretation of the law of attraction. Not that you can control everything you receive, but that you can become much more conscious of what you repeatedly send into the world through your thoughts, beliefs, and actions. One last question. Before you leave this book behind, think about one area of your life that isn't where you want it to be. Don't choose everything. Just one. Now ask yourself, what do I currently believe about this? What feelings appear when you think about it? What actions are you taking? And what actions are you avoiding? Now imagine that 6 months from today, something has changed. You have become more confident, more disciplined, healthier, calmer, more financially secure, more courageous. Whatever your version is, look back at today. What did you start doing? What did you stop doing? What belief did you finally let go of? What decision changed the direction of your life? And now ask yourself the most important question of all. Why can't that first step be today? You don't need to know exactly how everything will work out. You don't need perfect confidence. You don't need a sign from the universe. You need a direction and the willingness to take the next step. Because maybe the greatest lesson hidden inside the law of attraction isn't simply think about what you want. Maybe it is become conscious of what you are repeatedly thinking, feeling, believing, and doing. Because your thoughts influence your feelings. Your feelings influence your beliefs. Your beliefs influence your actions. Your actions create results. And your results shape the story you tell yourself about who you are. So be careful about the story you repeat, because eventually you may start living it. Thank you for spending these moments with Actionable Listener. And wherever you go after this, take one idea from this book with you. Not 10, just one. Think about it, question it, try it, and see what changes when you stop waiting for a different life and begin becoming the person who can create one. Until the next story, keep listening, keep questioning, and keep becoming